The deep sparkle pupa was designed to be fished early during the emergence, when those insects are first drifting near the bottom. But as the hatch gets going, as the insects start getting near the top and struggling to get through the surface film, you get a concentration of food, and that's where the trout will move. And you can recognize the caddis hatch. You'll see the fish rolling, you'll see them breaking, you'll see them coming out of the water completely. The caddis emergence is on. And for that, you need a fly that is very, very near in the surface film. Actually, the emergent pupa is a dry fly. The wing sits up dry, you see it as a dry, you fish it dead drift just like you would a dry fly. The materials we use are basically the same ones that we used for the deep pupa pattern. We have the sparkle yarn, we have our underbody dubbing mix. We are going to add a deer hair wing to float it to look like the emergent wings of the pupa changing into the adult. And we have a little bit of fur for the head. Start off, take your ply of sparkle yarn, pull them apart. With your comb out each ply. One thing, I'm not a very fast fly tyer, but I did have to tie approximately 3,000 of these, and I used to do it each morning, so I did get fairly fast on this one pattern. And the same trick, tie it in at top, let your thread spin it right around to the bottom, and lash it in at the bottom. That's going to be your overbody. You let it stay there for the moment. Your tacky Ovington's Wonder Wax. Now, are there other types of wax? Of course there are. I like this, it's convenient. The mixed fur blend. So important to get this dubbing technique. So important just to touch it. That will stay on the hook. As you wrap the thread, it binds it down. You don't need any more than that. If you ever look at the old English soft hackle patterns, they were very fussy about the type of silk they used. They had numbered colors for the Purcell silk, and they were very specific about the color they wanted. That's because the dubbing was so sparse that you could see the silk underneath the dubbing. They were not overdressed. And that's almost something you can apply to any nymph or wet fly. Generally, you do not want to overdress it. Finish wrapping your underbody. Comb out the rest of your overbody, the two plies that are hanging back. And pull the top ply over and tie it down. Couple of threads. Don't cut the stubs yet. Do the same thing with the underbody. Use a scissors point, loosen it up. This adds a glistening, silvery effect when the fly is in the water. Now there are a few different steps, minor differences between the emergent and the deep pupa pattern. Take your scissors, snip off a few fibers on top. That back is going to be covered by deer hair anyway, so the fish wouldn't see any fibers that were on top. Let them dangle just a little bit off the rear of the hook. Now you can clip your stubs. Wrap down tight so you won't have any slippage. At this point again, throw in a couple of half hitches. Pick up a piece of deer hair. Snip off a sizable clump. This is going to have to float the fly. It's going to have to be fairly buoyant. I was at a show and I was tying, and I was preparing the deer hair for the clump to put on. And a man looking at me said, "Why don't you use a hair stacker? Why don't you put it into a hair stacker and straighten out those tips and get them nice and even?" And I explained to him that I didn't use a hair stacker because it would make the tips nice and even. Look at the back wing of a caddisfly, and that back wing is rough and ragged. Lay it back a bit beyond the bend of the hook, tie it in. I like to tie my deer hair very strong. So after I have it bound, I'll take it, and as I run forward, I'll go through the stubs at different spots, at different angles. It's probably the most delicate part of any hair fly would be the wing, and you want to make sure you're not going to have it breaking off. You don't want it sliding or slipping around the hook. Snip those butts. Wrap your thread back. Now, you put on a fur head. Roll it so you get that opaque finish. And the emergent pattern is done. Now, what about fishing this fly? Why does it work? How does it work? You know, we did the underwater studies, and we watched the deep pattern underwater. Tremendous. When a fish moves, he sets up a feeding territory. He'll move 1.5 feet to the left to take the natural, and 1.5 feet to the right. The perfect imitation, he'll move 1.5 feet to the left and 1.5 feet to the right. But we started getting letters and comments about how great the emergent was. We had never done the underwater studies. There was no other emergent caddis pupa pattern around, and we just didn't want to tie up a drab one just to do the comparison. So we were lazy, and we just assumed it would be like the deep pupa, 3 times better than a drab imitation. But we kept getting these responses, and we kept on getting these great catches ourselves. And so we finally decided to go back and to figure out if there was anything special about the emergent, why it was catching fish, sometimes in tremendous numbers. We looked at it underwater, and what was happening is that fly, because of the antron, because those fibers didn't mat or felt together, that there were a lot of little air spaces, and it would grab oxygen bubbles from the meniscus, from the surface film, and it would be clustered in natural air bubbles, and some would be hanging off that little tail to the back that trails behind, and they'd be kicking off. And we'd see fish, and you'd see a fish move 1.5 feet to the left for the natural or 1.5 feet to the right. All of a sudden, especially on flat, clear water where you could really see it, you would see the fish break off his feeding pattern, no matter what he happened to be working at, and come streaking across and nail the emergent pattern. That has nothing to do with imitation. That's not imitation at work. What you're working at there is the theory of attraction. Maybe the trout thinks it's a terrestrial. Maybe it sees an insect that's on the surface, kicking its legs, driving the air bubbles under. Maybe just curiosity. It comes over to investigate. But he comes and he hits it hard. And there are times, especially on clear water, especially on still flat waters, when the emergent does seem to have a bit of magic to it. The Emergent Sparkle Pupa. I carry a lot of flies. I like to carry a lot of flies. But if there's one that I would not want to be without, especially during a caddisfly hatch, it's the Emergent Sparkle Pupa.